So okay, so
But
this takes me back to like way back in the beginning of our conversation. You mentioned um, your I'll say mentor calling in a favor to Hawaii for the telescope. How does it get decided like who gets to pull data from Hubble at any given time or from the new James Webb? Like, can you like could you like call up a friend at a different, at NASA and be like, hey, remember how I won in that poker game and I didn't make you pay? Like, you owe me a favor. Can you point the telescope? Like, how does that work?
so it really, really, really depends on the telescope.
Okay.
So for things like Hubble, for the Keck telescopes in Hawaii, the really big telescopes, the ones that are very expensive to operate, that are in extremely high demand because they're so powerful. For those telescopes, there's something called a TAC, which is a time allocation committee. And
Mhm.
so basically, you write a proposal and you kind of make the science case for what the question is that you're trying to answer,
Mhm.
what the data are that you need to answer that question, and then you have to have sat down and done the math to figure out how much time you need on that telescope to answer your question. Now, maybe you need 10 minutes every night for a year
Mhm.
because the measurement that you need is very short, but you need to do it over and over and over again because you're trying to look for, seasonal changes in an atmosphere or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
Maybe you just need to sit and stare at the same part of space for the entire night. And so one of the challenges is trying to figure out how to maximize everybody getting done what they need to do when some people are just going to want the whole night for like 3 days in a row, where other people are going to want like 20 minutes, once a week for a year.
Mhm.
There's also something, and this was what the program that I had mentioned for Titan was doing, which is something called an interrupt. And so if you're studying something that doesn't necessarily happen all the time,
Mhm.
which turns out to be, a fair amount of astronomy, is like, a supernova or a storm on Titan or something like that, where you can't like necessarily predict exactly what is going to happen.
Right.
You can basically put in proposals where you are like using a smaller telescope to monitor something, and then if you accomplish a certain threshold or trigger or whatever, then you get time on the telescope.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that we have are things called director's discretionary time. And so the big telescope facilities, including Hubble, have the opportunity for you to, it's not quite as much as like calling, but to write a very short proposal that
Mhm.
basically says, you know, like, holy shit, this thing just happened. Like, we need to go look at it right now.
Yeah.
Like, and if we don't look at it right now, we're never going to be able to look at it again,
Yeah.
or we're going to miss this really important opportunity or whatever. And then the director has the discretion to look at that proposal and say, okay, you know what, like, that is really important, and now we're going to shift around some of these other observations, so that we can make sure we get that. So it's definitely an interesting scheduling problem in astronomy because you have these things that happen very regularly that people
Mhm.
want to do. You have observations that don't necessarily matter when they get done as long as they get done, and then you have things that just like appear like effectively
Mhm.
out of thin air sometimes, and that people are going to want to study. Um, but one of the things that will happen is um, Hubble, not so much, because Hubble is definitely a special case. But with a lot of the ground-based telescopes, if they're still operating on a model where a person is physically going there to observe, or sometimes we do something called remote observing now, where you are sitting in a facsimile of the control room, but you're not actually at the telescope,
Mhm.
um, and you have control over the telescope for the whole night or half the night or whatever. Um, People will for sure like email or call, if they know who's on the telescope that night, and ask for a favor. um, and my feeling is that it's a lot less kind of like the backroom deals that people might think, and more
Mhm.
just we're all at some point, just in our own different ways, engaged in the same collective endeavor.
Right.
And so, I think the vast majority of the time, if people can help each other, they for sure will, because like at some point it's going to be you on the other end of the phone
Hmm.
wanting to be like, can you pretty please just go look at this one thing for us real fast. um, and so people try really hard to work together on those kinds of things, especially realizing that these are all very precious resources, all of these telescopes, and trying to maximize the science that gets done with them is important to all of us.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's almost like you mentioned backroom deals, which I kind of prompted you, but it's almost like just view it through the lens of like goodness of humanity rather than like the greedy side of humanity, and you'll view it correctly. Where it's like everybody's in this endeavor together. We're all trying to help each other. It's not like you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Any kind of weird thing going on. Um, I did want to ask you about. I think it was your postdoc you spent at NASA. You spent time at NASA.
I was actually at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory between undergrad and grad school.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. I was trying to
yeah,
figure out where that got sandwiched in. You spent a
yeah,
year there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so this is again, most of these questions are layman's questions, so you just have to go with me. But at least from a layman's standpoint, it seems like NASA's like the place to be for studying anything space, like
Hmm.
the mecca of space.
Yeah.
So I mean, you spent time there. You're Johns Hopkins now, which is not bad. um, but did you want to go back to NASA? Is Johns Hopkins a better place than NASA? Do you feel like you're in the right place, or is it like there's like an aspirational place where any kind of space nerd wants to be?
Yeah, so I guess I mean, I think that's something that I think that that's actually kind of a common question, although maybe framed differently most of the time I get asked it. But when I tell people what I do, they always assume I work for NASA. Um,
Right.
and so I think people don't realize that. I mean, this is true for all of science, but I think it's particularly true for space science. There's lots of different types of places where planetary scientists work, and so a lot of people are obviously employed at NASA centers. Um, those people, if they're scientists, tend to be working on NASA missions all the time, while whether that's things that are being developed or things that are currently in flight. But for the most part, that's what those people are doing for most, if not all, of their time. There are also people who work at various scientific institutes, which are kind of a similar idea, but they are kind of fully supported by grant money that they have to write proposals for, and again, they're spending most of their time doing science, but not necessarily NASA mission related. So it could
Right.
be
Right.
theoretical, it could be analysis from previous missions, it could be working on other things, and then um, the rest of us are at colleges and universities, um, and maybe doing research related to current missions, or maybe doing other work, but we're also teaching as part of our time. So in my case at Johns Hopkins, during the school year, I'm supposed to be spending about 30 to 40% of my time teaching,
Hmm.
rather than doing science. And so it's just a different way of doing the job, because I was interested in teaching. And, in that sense, we're teaching both undergrad. So I sometimes teach a kind of like planets 100 level class
Hmm.
for non-science majors who are just interested in knowing more about the solar system. But I also teach graduate students, and have my own graduate students who are actively working on research for their PhDs. And so it's just a different uh, type of job. And the fact of the matter is we're all working together. So some of my closest collaborators are still at NASA centers, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or since I'm out here in Maryland now, at NASA Goddard, which is pretty close by. Um, and so we all kind of work together on various things, just depending on um, what missions are happening, and
Hmm.
what else is going on in the world.
Could you divide it? Is it possible to divide it in saying that like NASA is more, we have to figure out how to make things work right now, whereas like you're in a more academic environment, so you have the ability to do that kind of almost like esoteric research that doesn't necessarily have a straight application. I'm thinking about I had another guest on, Richard Feynman, who he just finished his PhD at MIT, and he was at NASA working on like increasing the mobility and usability of spacesuits, which is a very functional problem. Like, how do we make these more
Yeah,
usable when people are inside of them? So I didn't know if it was as easy as saying, well, if you are at NASA and you're working predominantly on like missions, then it's going to be things that are put into use right now versus almost just data collecting, I'll call it. It's
yeah.
obviously more complicated than that, but towards like what you're doing.
Yeah, it really depends on the person. So, a lot of the scientists who work at NASA centers have the same ability to put in research grant proposals that I do.
Mhm.
And in fact, we all apply to the same pots of money, and so
Okay.
um, they can, get funding for part of their salary, or I guess in some cases all, although I think that rarely happens, to work on whatever science questions they want to work on. So, it really just depends on the person's position and, their career stage and their interests and stuff like that. What kind of work they're doing there.
Hmm.
But certainly, a lot of the scientists who are employed at NASA centers are spending at least, a fraction of their time um, either working on missions that are currently in development or missions that are currently flying.
Okay. Okay. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about. I'm gonna go off the deep end here. I want to ask you about your Etsy store and what you're doing over here with your artistic side.
Oh gosh. Uh, yeah, where to start? So about a year and a half ago, right? It's about 2 years
Do
ago.
you care? I should ask. Do you care if I like pull some images and then have superimpose them on the video so people can
That's
see?
that's fine. I'm a
Okay.
little nervous about which ones you're gonna pull, but go for it.
Okay.
No, it's fine. Um, so about 2 years ago, I got an email asking if I was interested in participating in this program here in Baltimore. So there's a bunch of other universities in Baltimore besides Johns Hopkins,
Right.
and one of those universities is called MICA, which is the Maryland Institute College of Arts.
Okay.
And MICA has a joint program with a research institute at Hopkins called HEMI, which is the Hopkins Extreme Materials Institute. So it's a HEMI MICA partnership
Okay.
in what they're calling the extreme arts, which probably sounds a little weird. Uh,
I'm imagining like we're like since you do triathlon, we're like on the bike trying to paint at the same time, or like
while
surfing, like
balancing planets or something.
right.
I swear I will eventually answer your question. This is really the answer to this
It's
thing about
okay.
my
It's
story.
okay.
Um, so I had gotten asked if I was interested in participating, and so what happens is the art students from MICA, and some of them are undergraduate students, and some of them are master students. If they're interested, apply to this program, which pairs them with a professor at Hopkins who's part of HEMI, and then you just kind of do stuff.
Okay.
So the program is, I guess it's at this point it's not that new, but basically the art students write a proposal and kind of talk about what they're interested in and what kinds of things they might want to collaborate on. And so you end up with this huge range of things because some of the MICA students are really interested in like trying to better understand material science because they're trying to figure out, and like this is no exaggeration, there was an intern who got the um like orange peels and like lemon peels and stuff like that that were left over from the juicer at Whole Foods,
Okay.
and we're trying to figure out how to make them into like material that you could then like, make into like tables and sculptures and stuff like that. And so they were working with somebody in material science to figure out like how to, because they had been messing around with this in their like studio, and they were trying to figure out how to like really make it into a scientific process so that the material was reproducible, so that it did exactly what they wanted, whatever. So that's like one type of example of what they did. So I swear I'm getting there. So the woman who had applied to work, who had mentioned that she was interested in working with me, whose name is Amy Wetch. She's amazing. She had up until that point been really interested in the microscopic, and so a lot of her art had to do with the human body, with the interaction of humans with the medical system, so particularly people who have chronic illnesses, those kinds of things. And so she had, as she tells the story, and she tells it much better than I do, she had been looking at the Hemi website, and there were some people who do that type of stuff in biophysics, stuff like that. And so she's like, oh, great, this would be really cool. I can go like learn about their research and whatever. And then she saw the description of what I do. And as far as I can tell, she hadn't ever like really been a space nerd before, which is hilarious now because she is such a space dork. But she, also was like, oh, well, Dr. Hurst's research looks interesting or whatever. And for various reasons, I was kind of primed to be interested in working with an artist when I got this email, and her work is spectacular. And so I tease her about this to this day because I didn't actually read her application. I never read her application. I scrolled down to the portfolio pieces that she had included pictures of at the bottom, and this one piece in particular, I feel like just like went like straight like to like the depths of my soul, like almost like I could physically feel it. And I was just like, I don't know who this woman is. I don't even really understand what's happening with this program, but like I need the person who made this piece of art in my life. And so I responded and asked, and said, I would be interested in, meeting with you if you want to come chat more about my work or whatever. And she came by, and we just like clicked instantly. And so she ended up getting the fellowship, and she spent the whole summer just kind of like going back and forth between her studio and hanging out with my research group. So she would come to like group meetings. She spent a lot of time in the lab asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of background reading. Um, but in the middle of all of this, I swear I'm going to get to the Etsy store.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
In the middle of all of this, I had also started working with a couple of the other faculty members in my department to participate in a program here in Baltimore City called Thread, which is a program that tries to provide support in lots of different meanings of that word for the students who are the most underperforming at, kind of the hardest. I don't even know what the word is that I want to use, but the kind of hardest hit schools in Baltimore City. So these are the students that are really underperforming in Baltimore City. And the idea of the program is that, there's nothing wrong with these kids. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they, don't have what it takes to do well in school. It's just that, they don't have the resources, whatever that means, to be successful. And so the idea of the program is to help pair them with people who will help them find the things that they need. And they get summer employment through this program. And so we had worked to bring 5 of them into our department that same summer that Amy was working with me. And so we had these 5 high school students who didn't know each other and didn't know any of us come to work in our department for the summer. And I had this like panic moment where I'm just like, this is going to be a catastrophe. Like, they don't know each other. They don't know us. Like, what are we going to do? And so I just texted Amy one day. And at this point, her and I had not known each other that long. And I was like, do you have any activities that would be good for like high school age kids, that would just be like an icebreaker, something that they could do for like an hour and, chat with each other and, get to know the people who are trying to facilitate. And I think she said no when I first asked.
Okay.
And then I think a little bit later she texted me, and she said, well, actually, I do this thing where you can make these coasters using alcohol inks. Like, the materials are pretty cheap. Like, anybody can do it. That might be fun. And like at that point, I feel like I was so desperate for anything that sounded like it might be fun that I was just like, sold, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so, the like first or second day that we had the kids there, Amy sat down and like taught them how to do this. And it's super fun. So
Hmm.
I was just like, oh, this is really cool, like whatever. And so I kind of bought my own and started experimenting with them. And I would text Amy like the pictures of the first couple ones I made, and she was like, Sarah, these are really good. And I'm like, you're just telling me that because you like me. And she's like, no, they're really good. And then I posted a couple of them on Twitter, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, are you going to sell these? And I was like, no. And then everybody was like, seriously, are you going to sell these? And I was like, no. And then, like, between Amy pressuring me and Twitter pressuring me, I finally decided to, like, open an Etsy store.
Hmm.
Um, and ended up selling a lot of them, which was cool. I find making it really relaxing. And so that was kind of nice because it was like this relaxing endeavor for me, like this creative outlet, but then
Hmm.
also, like, I could sell them to people. Um,
Yeah.
so that was how that happened. I realize it's a really long story, but like I
Well,
feel
there's
like
well, it's
context is important.
well, when I asked the question, it's really open ended. It's like it can be anything from the story you told to, oh, they looked pretty and I did art in high school. Like
Yeah.
there's no idea what the story's gonna be. So
And I like the story because and Amy and I like to tell it because when we talk about the program and when people ask about the internship program, they often will ask Amy what she got out of spending time with us and with me and with our collaboration. And I think a lot of people really get the feeling that that program was set up as kind of like a one way, I don't know,
hmm.
knowledge transfer or
Right.
experience or whatever. And um, first of all, I just don't think that's true in general, of the experience that people are having in doing this. I think there's a lot of amazing synergies between artists and scientists and engineers. But I like our example because we have a very concrete story that we can tell.
Yes.
Like, no, it actually went both ways because now Amy like taught me how to do this stuff, and like now I make art also. And um, anyway, so
No, it's a great story. I also think about like, and this isn't to like to my own horn, but I have a lot of very like I did art in high school and I play violin. I play in a local symphony and like I have my undergrad is in theoretical math and I there's a lot of links between all of these things that when you only spend time in one field, you don't see them. So I totally understand people saying like, oh, knowledge is only going one direction or like only one person's going to get something out of this. But
yeah,
there's so many other like like my last guest and I were talking about this too, like quantitative and qualitative things that you get out of it, where you can't always measure specifically this is what I got out of it, but there's a lot of qualitative things you can get out of a new relationship or experiences
right.
that help shape you and change what you're doing. And it's hard to explain that to people. So I totally get why you're like, we have a concrete example for those people that don't like or want qualitative data. We have we have a specific example of what happened in this kind of collaboration.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So we run a little bit over time, so I'll try to be sensitive time for you. Where can people find you if they want to kind of keep up with your work, see your Etsy shop maybe, um,
Well,
see what's going on with you?
I exist mostly on Twitter.
Okay.
So I'm Planet Doctor, but it's just Planet Dr.
Okay.
So doctor's not spelled out all the way. There you can find, I think, a link to both my professional website and my Etsy store. Um, that's the only like public facing social media I have. So people are always like, "What's your Instagram?" And I'm like, "I think I'm too old for Instagram. I don't know." Like there's all these new things like I don't even TikTok, like I don't even know what these other things are. So if you try to find me anywhere else, you will fail. But
That's fair.
I'm on Twitter very actively, and that I think has links to all of the other places where one could go about finding me.
Okay. And if I remember, I will put if you're at least if you're on YouTube, I will try to put a link to Sarah's ResearchGate in case you want to look at that as well. I try to publish those when they are possible to be linked to.
Yeah, that's great.
So, well, thanks for coming on and talking to me today, Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.